All right, this is COMP1050 Animation 2D Tools, Week 1, Lesson 1, Part 2. Okay, even though it says Part 1. So let's start off. So what are we going to do here? We're going to today, for the first part of this lesson, and again, we've got 3 of these lessons to get through today. 1, 2, 3. I mean, 3 chapters we're going to run through for a classroom and a book, right? Lots of content, but you're going to see it's quick. All right, I'm not going to refer too much, as much to the slides. I might skip ahead a little bit to get us going. Okay, so we're going to talk about some key concepts in Flash for you to understand what they mean. There's some terminology we're going to talk about as well, like keyframes and timeline and what those things mean in a bit. So I'll open like this. People say that Flash is dead, right? That's what they say. Flash is dead. Tom, why are we doing Flash? Why bother? Why not do something else? Why not use Unity? Why not use something else? What was that? Why not HTML5? Why use Flash as opposed to Adobe Edge and other things like that? There's a lot of other tools out there. Because Flash, to be honest with you, is still a great development environment. You can do a lot of things with it. It has a lot of power, to do stuff that once upon a time we couldn't even think about doing. It's part of the Adobe suite of products, and it's integrated. The integration between Photoshop, Illustrator, Flash is amazing. It's stuff you can do. You can do something if you're a good Photoshop person, or if you're a good Illustrator person. You can easily import stuff into Flash, assets into Flash very quickly. So think about this for making games, right? You start off and you do some assets in Illustrator. You create a ship in Illustrator. You import it with all its layers into Flash, and you can use that as a symbol, right, to call into almost like an object that you can create dynamically, programmatically through ActionScript without having anything on the stage of Flash at all. It's totally possible. So we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. But the great thing is Flash allows you to build things not just for the web with Swift files, which are Adobe doesn't support Swift files now anymore on mobile devices, right? But it also allows you to build things for Android and iOS and even desktop applications, right? So I think there's absolutely things you can do with Flash using a smaller skill set than someone who's, example, building a native app for a Mac OS or even a Windows machine or whatever. You can build a UI with the skill sets that we use for web design. So let's take a look at Flash. So when we first start Flash, and I'm just going to skip over to the actual interface right now. So here we are in Flash, and when we first look at it, we have this little pop-up screen, this little helper screen that comes up, and it says, hey, what do you want to do, right? And one of the first things that you want to try and do is create a new document. What we want to try and do is create this ActionScript 3 document. Even though we're not actually doing any ActionScript 3, the back end, this is what we're going to publish to. Actually, what this is saying, when you publish your movie, how are you publishing it? Are you doing is it an ActionScript 3 movie? Is it an Adobe Air movie? Is it an Air for Android movie? How are you publishing this movie? And the answer is we're going to do ActionScript 3. So click on that first. So here we are in Flash. First thing that you notice is that there is this white space in the middle of your screen, right? In the middle of your screen called the stage, right? And by the way, I'm going to take it really slow. For someone who's done this course before, or if you know about Flash already, bear with me. I'm going to treat you like you've never seen it before, right? And it's good because it means I'm going to cover all this stuff. And even though you guys can pull your stage back and forth, doesn't mean you're experts. But let me just go back, all right? The stage. This is the stage. Here, in this area here, you have the layers of the stage, right? And here, where all these numbers are, is the timeline, right? You also have your standard menus up here for if you're using a Mac. And for Windows, it'll be on the actual app itself, right? You also have the toolbar, which runs down the side. We'll be using some of these tools, as well as some other aspects that kind of almost like other toolbars that are kind of in here. In the middle, you have your properties sidebar. In your properties sidebar, you also have the library, if you look at it here, which we're going to use extensively, as well as this transform properties area as well. So these 3 tabs, we're going to kind of tab through these in our course of using Flash to create our our medium. Okay, first thing we notice is the stage. This is the stage. If we click on the stage itself, there's nothing happening. There's also this part here that's off the stage, this gray area. It's called the pasteboard. Pasteboard, stage. Pasteboard, stage. We also have the way this has been set up, this flash itself, how everything is presented to you. All these modules, they're presented to you in this particular workspace that you can modify, just like any Adobe product. And if you go to the top right where it says Essentials, you can pull down any other kinds of workspace presets, if you will. So if, let's say, for example, you think you're going to be an animator, then you can click on Animator, and if you notice now, some of the panels and everything else that are built into Flash have been changed around. Because you know what, animators deal more with timelines, and they animate here on the timeline is right at the top. Okay? You can change it if you're a developer. You can click on Developer, and then all of a sudden you'll have a different preset of how it's going to look like. You have output and errors, compile errors, and if you notice, I don't have a timeline here at all, because you know what? A lot of times developers don't work on the timeline, if that doesn't suit you. But primarily for this course, when we get together, we're going to work with Essentials, right? So we're going to work with Essentials. So this is the, if you kind of come back into Essentials, this is the preset that we're going to be using for us to get together, right? Again, if you feel comfortable, you can use whatever workspace your heart desires. As long as you're comfortable with it, you decide what you want to do and how you want to do it, okay? So Flash, again, you have the stage, and right now there's nothing on the stage, and you have these layers. And we're going to talk about what these layers and the stage is. If I want to start drawing simple objects, and we're going to get to that in a second, but just as a demo, right, I want to take an object like a square, right? So here I've clicked on this icon on the right. It's a rectangle. If you hold down these icons that have this little arrow at the bottom, I'm just going to zero in on here. If you guys can see, there's a little arrow at the bottom of this icon. Same thing with this, the pen tool, and this, the 3D tool, and this one, the IK Bones tool, and so on. All of these little icons have these down arrows, which mean if I hold down it, there's a bunch of other tools that are hidden underneath this tool. All right, so even though there's this one toolbar, there's a bunch of extra tools that are hidden that are underneath these other tools. Okay, that's one thing to note. Okay. So let's go back to the rectangle tool. So rectangle, if you notice right away, before I draw anything, it has a couple things. There's a fill right here and a stroke over here, right? So right now my stroke is a weird color, right? My stroke is kind of this brown color. And I'm going to change it so it's a black color, right? Because I like black. Now if I make it a black stroke and a black fill, it's not really that interesting. So let's make it a red fill of some kind. I'm going to choose the standard red fill here on the left-hand side of this color palette, right? Here it is. And if you want to know the exact amount, if you just click that again, if you notice, it'll say FF0000, which is purely red, everything else off, right? Now, other things I notice here is alpha. My alpha is my alpha transparency. And right now it's 100%, which means it's completely opaque or solid. Okay, that's what this means, right? If I start drawing, so if I go back to my rectangle, I start drawing my rectangle on the screen, right? Here it is. Right now, whoa, what happened to my red and whatever? Because, right, if you notice, my standards, it goes back to my standards. My standard fill was this, and my stroke was this. If I want to change this, because this is, if I use my selection tool, which is up here at the top, and I click on my, my rectangle itself, right, what have I done? Have I actually clicked on the object itself, right? Yes, I have, because I'm using object drawing mode, and there's different drawing modes. Right now, I drew this object in object drawing mode, and there's two drawing modes primarily in Flash. There's object drawing mode and graphic drawing mode. All right. If I do this, I can move the entire object around completely together, right? And the stroke and the fill are together, right? Let me just delete this now. If I go back to the rectangle down here at the bottom, it tells you your drawing mode. The bottom right-hand corner of the toolbar. Right? Right now I'm in object drawing mode. I want to go into graphic drawing mode. I'm changing my drawing mode to the regular graphic drawing mode. So now if I draw, right? If you notice, if I click on it, right? Now if you say it looks like shapes, right? There's shapes here. I'm not an object drawing mode. And I've only selected, by the way, the fill. If I move the fill by itself, the fill and the stroke are separate entities, right? In shape drawing mode, right? In object drawing mode, they are one. There's different reasons for this. For example, if I now remove the shape and move it far away, I can move the shape separately, right? Same thing with this object here. I can move around. I can try and move around the border, this border around it as much as I want, and I'm actually modifying this object by itself. Same thing with the fill. This is the fill. So the fill and the stroke are two different things, right? I can modify them differently, right, with shape drawing mode. Okay, so let's just get rid of this. Again, I'm taking my selection tool, and if I drag a square around everything, then I select everything and I can delete it. I can go back into rectangle drawing mode here and draw it again, right? So here we are. If I want to select everything, there's two ways I can do this. I can double click, right, which selects everything in this mode, right? Or I can select it all. That's the way to select both the fill and the stroke in this drawing mode. If you select one, you're only affecting one at a time, which gives you some power, but also can mess you up if you're used to drawing in a different program. You're like, hey, wait a minute. Why is the fill moving? Because I'm in a different drawing mode, right? If I want to modify my stroke now, so I click on the stroke, or my fill, I mean, if I want to modify the fill to be red, here it is, it changed to red. And now if I want to modify the stroke, right, if you notice, I can select every part of the stroke because the stroke is not connected the way we think, right? If I highlight the whole thing, though, I can just simply change the stroke to whatever I want. Like, for example, if I want a yellow stroke for whatever reason, there it is. But otherwise, if I only select one part of it, let me just escape out of that and undo. If I only select this part of the stroke, right, and then I change that part to yellow, right, then only that part changes, right? So lots of control in Flash, lots of control. There's two drawing modes primarily, object drawing mode and shape drawing mode. Please keep that in mind, all right, because it can mess you up. And we'll talk about how it does that, right? The other things that we're going to talk about today a lot as a preview is we're going to be talking about symbols, right? And symbols are reusable objects that we're going to use over and over again. An example would be this. I have this square. It's pretty ugly and useless, right? This little square here. So, but if I want to reuse this square again, like for example, let's say I take some text and I go onto the square and I type in the number 1. I don't know why I would do this, but let's just say for whatever reason I decide this is the way it's going to be, right? And I move this over a little bit, and I change the color of my stroke to 0, right, or 1. There it is, a square with a number 1, right? And I want a lot of squares with the number 1 for whatever reason I want this, right? Well, I can actually highlight the entire thing, right-click onto it, and go to Convert to Symbol. Once I've done that, I can name it, 1 square. I'm just making this a symbol, right? One thing to note, symbols, which are the way we're going to be creating a lot of our objects, not just for Flash, but also for things like our graphic animation we're going to use for games, have something called a registration point. The registration point is where the object is centered from. In this particular case, the top left corner. You can also specify the middle, which is also a very common registration point when it comes to gaming, because if we specify the top left corner and we rotate, where's it going to rotate from? The top left corner, right? So it's kind of weird, right? So if you want to rotate something, you want to have a registration point in the middle, right? In this case, let's just leave it at the top left corner. The type here under registration, under the type, we're gonna create a movie clip, right? Which is the most common type of symbol we're going to be creating in this course, right? And then we're going to say OK. We're going to leave the rest just the way it is and click OK, right? Once I've done that, now everything's together, just like it was for an object drawing mode, right? Including the 1, right? So we've got a 1, we've got this fill, and we've got a stroke, and they're all one object, like almost like a group if you think about it, but not quite. Now, if I go to the library, I see that I actually have a symbol called 1 square, which is what I named it, here in the library, right? So if I delete it from my stage, so here's my symbol called 1 square, I'm deleting it from my stage, but I still have it in the library, and I drop it. If I drag and drop from the library to the stage, and again, and again, and again, I don't have to do it more than, I don't have to define my symbol more than one time, but I can drag and reuse this symbol over and over again. Flash only sees it as one symbol. All I'm doing is creating new instances. Keep in mind these words, guys, for you programmer types. I'm creating a new instance of the symbol, right? Symbols can also have really cool names. Like, for example, right now, if I go to properties of this particular symbol, my instance, there isn't an instance name. I can call this square 1 or, number 1, right? I can call this number 2, right? Same symbol, right? Different instance name, right? And I can actually address them. When it comes to instance names are really important when it comes to addressing things in ActionScript, which we're not going to do right now. But like I said, this is the power of using symbols in Flash, which we're going to get to today. All right, so I've got my symbol, and I've got a bunch of other these instances, which we're not going to use. I've also got my timeline and my layers, which is really, really important. For example, I got my symbol, which is 1 square. Here it is, right? And now I want to edit it. The way to edit symbol is I've got to go into symbol editing mode. And the way to do that is to double click. So I double click. And now what happens is not only do I have access to to the symbol, right? But I'm actually down a layer. If you notice here on the top left corner, I have something called scene 1, right? And then when I double clicked, I went into 1 square, which is actually the symbol itself. So I'm actually in symbol editing mode right now, right? Here in symbol editing mode, I can do a bunch of different things. I can actually move this stuff around, right? I can break this symbol apart. I can do all kinds of stuff. If I double click again, right? So I go into this thing here. Here's my object. I can move the background of my symbol around, right? I've defined my symbol. It's in my library, but I feel like moving it around. Same thing with my, let's say my text, right? My text is here instead of here, and I want to leave it like this. Once I come out of symbol editing mode, and I go back to my library, if you notice, my symbol has changed. My symbol has changed. It's not anymore the symbol that I had before. And that means every instance of that symbol that I have is also changed. Now if I drag it in there, now it's the same. Everything that I've changed becomes changed in my symbol, right? I've created new instances of the same object over and over again. Key stuff when it comes to programming. Think about the power of what you can do. Create a symbol, a ship, an enemy, a bullet, whatever, and then put it in your library and call it up with ActionScript. Lots of power. Okay, but we're not going to get there for a bit. I'm just giving you a little preview. So bye-bye all the symbols. I still have this symbol in my library, which I'm going to keep. I can create as many symbols as I want. The right thing to do, though, from a best practice perspective, though, is to, if I'm going to create a symbol, in this case I'm making an oval, and if I hold the Shift key, I'm going to make an oval that's a circle, right? Because a circle is just an oval that's with equal sides, right? Kind of stuff. It's a radius that's equal. So here's my circle. It's got the same kind of properties, fill and stroke. I'm drawing it in shape drawing mode, and if you notice, again, it has the same properties of fill and stroke. Okay, so the fill and stroke are separate in shape drawing mode. If I did it in object drawing mode, fill and stroke would be together, right? Let's go back. So here it is. I want to change my circle so that maybe it's a gray circle. Right here is my gray circle, and maybe what I want to do with my gray circle, if I open up the color palette as an example, instead of a solid color, maybe I want to do something like a radial gradient. Okay, so here it is, my radial gradient. Not really that great, but let's just say it's like more like a circle, right? And from here, right, as an example, right now it has both fill and stroke, right? Now I can create this as a symbol right now, but if I have an object that I want to add on to it, like for example a piece of text, the right thing to do from a best practice perspective, it's give it its own layer. All right. So right now let's define this as the circle layer. On the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, right, is the layers, right? So if I double-click this layer, I can name it circle. This is my circle layer. Here it is. And now I can create a new layer. Here it is, on top of the circle layer, and I'm going to call this text. Right? The great thing about layers is that if you notice there's these 3 buttons here for the layers. There's this button on the left, which is like an I button, right? There's a button in the middle, which is the lock. And there's the button on the right, which is show all layers as outlines, right? What I can do is for each individual layers, I can apply either one of those states. So for example, I can lock my circle layer, and I can also turn it invisible, or turn it off, right? So you can't see the visibility of it. So now my circle layer is locked. That means I can't move my circle or even select it right now at all. It's locked because right now I'm on my text layer, right? So layers allow us to isolate shape and information into different levels. The way we see our objects are in layer precedence. So for example, the topmost layer is the one we see closest to us. It's the top, or the one on top. The bottom layer is the one on the bottom. So typically backgrounds, the bottom layer. Anything else, objects, are on top of that. So higher in terms of position, right? So if I want to drop in a piece of text now, here it is, and I want to drop it here in the middle of my circle, I've defined the text. I'm going to draw the number 1 again. Here it is, and this is a gray one, right? It remembers my settings for my colors, but I want to make it a white one. Here it is. I'm selecting it, and I'm dropping it right into the middle of my object. Now there's 2 layers. There's the text layer and the circle layer, right? And now I'm going to highlight both those layers, and I want to group them together with modify group. You can also do it by Control or Command G on the Mac. Control, Windows, Command on the Mac, right? And if I group, now it's one big group, right? If I've actually done this properly, right? So if I move it around, the reason why I didn't group properly, I can tell you why right now, is because I don't have this layer unlocked. I have to unlock this layer, the circle layer. Now let's try that again. Here we go. Now both are, I can group, Control or Command G, right? And now both of them are going to move together, theoretically. Let's do that again. Let's try it. Highlight them all, right? And group them together, right? And the thing with this is that once they're grouped together, even though they're in separate layers, you can treat them as one object, right? They're still not a symbol yet. If I right-click onto this grouping of symbols, and I say Convert to Symbol, right? And I call this, I don't know, circle 1, right? I've got a circle 1 instance now in my library. I've got a circle 1 and a square 1, right? Here it is. If I double click on this instance, I can go down into the actual, the symbol itself. And if I keep clicking, I can get down into each one of the groups. One group or the other group, okay? So there's different layers that I can go down inside my object itself. So let's go back to the scene. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to delete it. In my library, I can drag and drop a symbol, like for example a circle, and another one, and another one. I'll take a square, the same square we defined before, and here's another circle, and I'll layer it on top. And if you notice, right, in my main timeline, I have text and circle, right? Well, the reason for that is because, right, in text and circle, those are the layers that I had from my object. But this is the main timeline, which we'll talk about later on. Let's suppose I want to animate my circle 1, right? Well, how do I do that? Well, animation, if you notice on the bottom of your timeline, you've got a bunch of different frames, right? And if you notice, if I click on the stage, right, here's some things you can notice. And I go Properties. The stage has a size. 550 by 400 is my standard. If I want to try and change this to 800 by 600, here we go, 800 by 600. I want to make the stage a little bigger, if I can type. There we go. And I want to see the whole stage now. Actually, on the top right here, you can change your visibility to show all, right? Or you can change your visibility to fit in window, which fits the whole stage in the window plus all the objects. Here it is, my object. Right now, I have 2 layers, right? And this object here is on my text layer, which doesn't make any sense, right? Let's delete this object right now and delete my layer, right? And this is my main timeline. So let's just rename this main, right, this layer. And now I want to go to my library and drag and drop my circle, right, again, on my main layer, my main timeline, okay? Here it is. In here, if you notice, there's an actual frame that's in here, right? If you look down into the timeline, there's one frame that I got in here, right? What I want to do is I want to insert a keyframe, right? Every time I insert a keyframe, if I do it again, so insert, and if I go insert keyframe on this one, it'll add another frame, watch. Right? What are keyframes? Keyframes are the places where the objects on my stage change. Whether they change in position, size, color, shape, whatever. Keyframes are the ability for us to mark when an object changes on the stage. Let's go back. So I'm going to delete those two keyframes. And if I know, if I click on my stage itself and I go to properties, I know my frames per second from my movie is 24 frames per second. Where do I have to put a keyframe if I want in 1 second for my ball, my circle, to move from one side of the stage to the other? 24, because it moves 24 frames per second. So in 1 second, if I want my ball or this circle to move to the other end of the stage, I got to go to frame number 24, which means I got to click on frame 24 here in the timeline, right? I got to right click, and I can insert keyframe. And if you notice, when I insert a keyframe, right, I insert all these extra frames in the middle. Flash does the work for you and inserts all these frames in the middle for you, right? So now I can scrub my timeline. Here's my timeline, because I can move this little red line here and scrub forward and back on my timeline, right? Right now, if I go to here in this particular frame, my circle is here. If I go to here, I can actually move my circle, right? By pressing shift, I can move it in one direction only, way over here to the other side, right? So if I scrub my timeline, here it is here, and then all of a sudden, poop, it pops to the other side, right? Now, if I want to create a tween or an animation, I right-click in the middle somewhere, and I can say, create motion tween, right? Once I create a motion tween, now when I scrub my timeline, right, as an example, if you notice it pops to the other side here like this, right? And that's what it's going to do. It's going to go from 1 second, and then the next second, poof, it's going to pop over to the other side, right? This doesn't seem to be very effective, because if I want to run my movie, and you do this by pressing Control or Command on your Mac and Enter. So if I go Command Enter, I run my movie, and in 1 second it goes boop, boop, boop. That's not what I wanted, right? It just makes it go flicker back and forth every second, right? I don't want that, so I want to remove my frames. I can do that. Here's my first keyframe. My first keyframe is way over here. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, right? I'm going to go back to frame 24, right? And I'm going to insert, what I can do is I can select all these frames up to frame 24, right? And I can say insert frames. So I insert all these extra frames in up to frame 24. And then what I want to do is I want to kind of create a motion tween, right? Here it is. And right to here, if you notice, the timeline doesn't change. If I take it, at this particular case, if I go to frame number 12, here I am, and I create a keyframe, right? So here I'm inserting a keyframe based on position. I can do scaling. I can skew it, rotate, whatever I want to do. Let's say I want to do a position keyframe. Here it is, and I want to move it. So here is in the middle of the screen at frame 12. I do a position change, right? So here I am. I go from here to here. Flash does the rest. Flash actually inserts all the in-betweens between keyframe number 1 on frame 1 to all the way to number 12. But here it stays the same because I haven't done anything from 12 to 24, right? So I go to 24, and again, I want to insert on frame number 24, right? I want to insert a keyframe. And again, I can choose position, scale, whatever. And now I can make instead of it going in a straight line, right, I can make it so that it goes, let's just down here, right, as far as I want, right? So let's take a look at that. So it goes here, and now I've changed the path so it goes all the way down there because I've made it move, right? Or if I go back, undo, undo. So here, this keyframe, right, I can just move it to wherever I want. If I move this whole keyframe, it'll start and end at different places, right? Let's try this again. So now it starts from the beginning and ends up there. Or, right, I click on the symbol, and I can continue moving it in a straight line. All right, so now I've got, look, Goes from one end to the other. And now if I press Control or Command Enter, it actually moves it around and around, and it'll keep looping that over and over again. Simple animation, right? So the great thing is you're able to create in Flash simple objects and animate them through the use of the interface really quickly. When I've done that, by the way, because I've created my movie, if you notice, Flash creates a bunch of little files for you. It creates a Swift file, and it also tells me how big my file is right now. The first time I did it was 900, or the latest time I did it, sorry, is 979 bytes. That's how much it took for me to create that movie, right? So you can actually check how big the movie is every time you do Control Enter. You're going to do Command or Control Enter on the Mac or the PC very, very often for the next little while. But I wanted to give you a little preview as to what we can do. Okay. Do we need a break? 10 minutes? Let's take a quick 10-minute break and we'll come back and we'll continue.